In a snow-covered Pennsylvania village in 1871, two 6-year-old twins were found changed beyond recognition. Their hair turned white, their faces lined with age, and their eyes vacant with memories no child should hold. The doctor's lantern trembled as he whispered, "These are not children. These are something else." It began with silence, a kind of silence that made even the crows pause mid-flight. The town of Mill Creek, nestled in Pennsylvania's rolling hills, was accustomed to winter's stillness. But on January 14, 1871, something shifted. A family awoke to find their twin daughters, Clara and Elise Dunham, transformed overnight. The mother's scream shattered the dawn. Neighbors rushed through snow-dusted streets, their boots crunching like breaking bones underfoot. The twins sat motionless on their small bed, dressed in the same nightgowns they'd worn the evening before. Only now, their faces bore the weathered lines of time, creased, sunken, almost ancient. Their once golden curls had turned the color of frost. Dr. Whitfield, a man whose hands had delivered half the town's children, examined them with a trembling jaw. Their hearts beat slowly, too slowly. Their eyes darted as though they could see something no one else could. When he asked if they were in pain, Clara's lips moved faintly. "It's colder." Inside. By noon, the town square was filled with murmurs. Some said it was a curse, others, a disease from the mines. Yet a few whispered it was divine punishment for something the Dunham family had hidden. The father, a coal foreman named Samuel Dunham, refused to speak. He stood outside the home, snow melting on his shoulders, staring at the smoke rising from his own chimney. When asked what had happened the night before, he simply muttered, "They went to sleep like always." But the midwife, Mrs. Ellery, claimed she'd heard something. Faint footsteps outside the Dunham home around midnight. "Too heavy for a child," she said. The sheriff ordered the family to stay indoors until a physician from Philadelphia could arrive. The town began to hold its breath, afraid the strange aging might spread. Yet when night fell again, the old church bell tolled once, though no one had touched it. Outside in the snow by the Dunham house, there were footprints leading away, two small pairs fading into the woods. Would you have followed them? Or locked your door and prayed? Dr. Whitfield spent that night in his study, candles burning, low, the air thick with the scent of sulfur from his lantern. He had seen fever, consumption, even deformities from the mines, but never the body devouring itself in reverse. He wrote his first report by trembling hand, chronological decay unexplained, both children aged 30 years overnight. At dawn, he returned to the Dunham home. The twins were awake. Elise was humming a lullaby that no one recognized, slow, mournful, not of any local origin. Clara stared at the window, murmuring about the man in the fog. Whitfield examined their eyes with his magnifier and froze. The irises had fractured like old porcelain, faint cracks radiating from the pupils. Yet their pulse, though weak, persisted. "What year is it?" he asked softly. Elise answered without hesitation. 1841. The doctor's spine stiffened. The twins had not even been born then. He sealed his notes, intending to send them to the Philadelphia College of Physicians. But the telegram office never transmitted his message. The line had gone dead that morning, without storm or warning. By noon, even the birds had vanished from the trees. The mother began to speak of dreams, dreams of a river flowing backward, of voices calling her daughters' names from beneath the ice. The father refused to sleep at all. He began drinking by the fire, muttering about something he'd seen in the mine tunnels years ago. A room where time stopped breathing. That night, Dr. Whitfield stood by the twins' bedside again. Their skin had grown translucent, veins visible like pale blue threads. They spoke in whispers, finishing each other's sentences, describing places no one in Mill Creek had ever heard of. The Red House, the Iron Bridge, the Mirror Lake where faces come back wrong. When Whitfield touched their hands, they recoiled, whispering, "It's not time yet." He stumbled from the house, his notes clutched tightly, and looked toward the woods where those footprints had led. The fog had thickened. Somewhere beyond the pines, he swore he heard children laughing, old, brittle laughter, like the creaking of chairs in an empty room. Tell me in the comments, do you believe this was fate or something darker? 3 days after the strange transformation, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. It bore the wax seal of the College of Physicians and the name Dr. Nathaniel Crane, a specialist in rare degenerative illnesses. He was said to be a man of logic, cold, methodical, unshaken by superstition. Yet when he stepped off the stagecoach, in Mill Creek even he paused. The air hung heavy, metallic, as though time itself had rusted. Crane's boots left perfect impressions in the snow as he walked toward the Dunham home. The townsfolk watched from behind curtains. He carried a black satchel, the kind used by surgeons, and a small brass timepiece he wound obsessively. Inside, he found the twins sitting by the fire, staring at him with a quiet knowing, like they had been waiting. He examined them one by one. Pulse steady but unnaturally slow, skin cold, pliant, reflexes dull, yet their minds, alert, articulate, disturbingly coherent. They spoke of things Crane could not place, the architecture of old London, the price of bread in 1840, and even the color of uniforms from wars they could never have witnessed. Crane requested to see the father. Samuel Dunham hesitated, but eventually revealed something he had buried in silence for years, an old miner's journal. "We found something under the third shaft," he said, voice breaking. "A room carved into the rock, with markings that looked like clocks without hands." That night, Crane examined the book under candlelight. The sketches inside were haunting, circular symbols, intersecting lines, and what appeared to be human silhouettes trapped inside spirals. Written beneath were words in Latin: tempus non transit, nos transimus. Time does not pass, we do. At midnight, Crane heard footsteps upstairs. When he entered the twins' room, they were both standing, facing the wall, whispering in perfect unison. The wallpaper trembled, faint ripples moving across it like water. He approached cautiously and asked what they were saying. Clara turned, her face serene, and whispered, "He's almost here." "Who?" Crane demanded. "The man who forgot to die," Elise answered. The candle flickered violently, the flame stretching sideways. Then, without wind or motion, it went out. In that sudden blackness, Crane felt a presence behind him, close, breathing. He turned, but there was only the cold. If you lived in this town, would you have stayed or run? By the following evening, Dr. Crane insisted on seeing the mine that Samuel Dunham had spoken of, the old number 3 shaft, sealed since a collapse 5 years earlier. The sheriff warned him that the tunnels were unstable, but Crane would not be swayed. "If this began in the earth," he said grimly, "then that is where the truth still lies." The descent was suffocating. The air grew colder the deeper they went, until the lantern flames bent and flickered as though recoiling from something unseen. Samuel led the way, his breathing ragged, his eyes darting nervously at the shadows that seemed to move along the walls. At last they reached the chamber he had described, a hollow carved by no human hand. The stone was smooth, circular, and etched with strange markings, as if time itself had passed unevenly over its surface. In the center stood a pedestal of black slate, and upon it the remnants of what looked like a clock, but one without numbers, without hands. Just a hollow ring that pulsed faintly with warmth. Crane touched it, and a faint hum filled the air. The lanterns dimmed. For a moment he thought he heard something whisper. Not in English, not even in words, but in rhythm, like breathing turned backward. Samuel fell to his knees, clutching his chest. "We should never have opened it," he gasped. Crane knelt beside the pedestal, tracing the Latin inscription chiseled into the floor. Chronos volt debitum sum. Time demands its debt. He froze. The same phrase had appeared in the twins' ramblings earlier that day. Then a sound, faint, deliberate, echoed through the tunnel. a ticking, not from any watch or machine, but from the stone itself. Each tick was followed by a shudder in the ground, as if the mine was exhaling. Crane backed away, eyes wide. "This chamber," he whispered. "It's not measuring time. It's feeding on it." When they emerged hours later, Samuel's hair had turned noticeably gray. His face, once ruddy, looked drawn and hollow. "You saw it too," he muttered. "That's what it does. Takes what it wants, when it wants." Crane said nothing. He only glanced at his pocket watch, which now ran backward. That night in the Dunham house, the twins began to laugh in their sleep. Old, rasping laughter that sounded nothing like children. Would you have gone back into that mine, knowing what waited beneath? On the fifth night after the twins' transformation, the sky above Mill Creek changed. The moon, pale and full, seemed to tilt unnaturally, as though drawn by an unseen weight. At first, the townspeople thought it a trick of mist or drink, but then came the impossible. The moon began to move backward. Dr. Crane stood in the Dunham yard, notebook in hand, staring up as time itself appeared to reverse. The clock in the church tower struck midnight twice, then fell silent. The horses whinnied in their stalls, refusing to be calmed. Every pendulum in town stopped swinging. Inside the house, the twins awoke simultaneously. Their eyes were black as coal, reflecting no light. Clara whispered, "He's near," while Elise began to hum the same hollow tune she had sung days before. Their mother, pale and shaking, begged them to stop, but they did not seem to hear her. Crane rushed upstairs. "Who is near?" he demanded. The twins turned their heads toward him in perfect unison. "The one who sleeps beneath," Clara said. "The man who forgot his years." A thunderous crack split the night, not from the sky, but from the earth beneath them. The house trembled. In the distance, dogs began to howl, their cries warped, as if echoing backward. Crane looked out the window and saw the trees bending against a wind that did not exist. Then came the smell, metallic, electric, like burnt iron. The lamps flickered. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The snow mid-fall, the flame mid-flicker, the sound mid-breath. The very air seemed to hold its lungs, and then, as quickly as it had begun, time lurched forward again, violently wrong. When the motion returned, the twins were standing, eyes closed, speaking in a voice not their own. "The clocks beneath are waking," they said. "He wants what was promised." Crane stepped closer, his hand trembling. "Promised by whom?" "By those who mind the hours," Elise replied softly. "The men who dug too deep." At dawn, the town awoke to shattered glass, frozen wells, and clocks that now all pointed to the same impossible hour, 11 minutes before midnight. The moon still hung in the same place, unmoving, as if time itself refused to advance. And in the distance, beyond the woods, the faint sound of ticking grew louder. Would you have believed this was coincidence, or a warning too late to heed? By the sixth day, the Dunham twins no longer spoke like children. Their voices had taken on the cadence of adults, calm, measured, ancient. They addressed their parents not as Mama or Papa, but by their full names, Margaret and Samuel. Each word landed with eerie precision, as though they were reciting a script long memorized. Dr. Crane began recording everything. His journal pages filled with sketches of symbols, transcriptions of the twins' phrases, and desperate notes that circled back to one repeating question: how can memory outlive time? The girls began recalling things no living person could. Clara described a fire in Mill Creek's foundry, an event that had occurred 30 years before her birth. Elise spoke of a flood that destroyed half the valley in 1839. She named victims, locations, and even described the smell of oil lamps snuffed out in panic. When Crane checked the town records, the details matched. Every name, every date. "Impossible," he muttered. "This isn't recollection. It's residue." Margaret Dunham grew weaker each day. She refused to enter her daughter's room after midnight, claiming she heard voices that were not theirs. Sometimes the whispering came from behind the walls, other times from beneath the floorboards. The twins no longer slept in beds. They preferred the attic, where an old trunk stood, a relic from Samuel's mining days. Inside, Crane found something wrapped in oiled cloth, a fragment of dark stone etched with the same symbols from the subterranean chamber. The twins had been sleeping beside it, their hands resting on its surface as though drawing warmth from its cold touch. When Crane demanded to know where they'd found it, Clara smiled faintly. "It called to us," she said. "He said it would keep us from forgetting again." That night, Crane dreamt of the mine, of corridors that breathed, and clocks suspended in the dark, their hands turning in opposite directions. He woke drenched in sweat, his watch spinning backward on its own chain. By morning, the townspeople began to whisper about the twins openly. Some said they had been replaced, others that they were vessels for something that should have remained, buried. The church bells rang without a hand upon them, echoing through fog that never seemed to lift. Crane packed his satchel and turned to Samuel. "If they remember too much," he said grimly, "it's because something wants to be remembered through them." Outside, the ticking grew louder, closer, almost beneath their feet. Would you have dared to listen to what those children knew? The morning after Crane's warning, Samuel Dunham summoned the doctor to the cellar. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling from sleepless nights. "You said something wants to be remembered," he whispered. "Then maybe it's time I tell you what we did down there." By the flicker of a single oil lamp, Samuel unrolled a sheet of parchment so brittle it cracked at the edges. It was a contract, dated 1849, signed by 6 men, all miners from Mill Creek. The title across the top read, "Pactum Horology, the Hourglass Pact." According to Samuel, the miners had unearthed a chamber unlike anything in the region, walls smooth as glass, humming faintly, as if alive. In its center rested the same circular device Crane had seen days earlier. When they touched it, time around them seemed to slow. The flames froze in mid-air. Their voices echoed backward. One man screamed that he could see his own birth. They fled, but one, Thomas Greaves, returned alone. He believed the object could be used to cheat death itself. Weeks later, he was found near the shaft entrance, still breathing but aged beyond recognition. His body withered, but his eyes were awake. They buried him quietly, fearing no one would believe it. Samuel looked away. "We sealed the mine. We thought it was over. But my wife was kin to Greaves. The bloodline carried something. Maybe that's why it chose the girls." Crane examined the contract again. At the bottom, faint but visible, was an additional line scrawled in a shaking hand. "The debt will pass through flesh until paid." That night, Crane returned to the Dunham house with renewed dread. He found the twins seated before an hourglass they had taken from the mantel. Sand flowed upward through the glass. "It's counting back," Elise said softly. "He's almost here." Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. The church bell rang once, though the tower had long been abandoned. Crane felt it in his chest, each toll heavier than the last, echoing the tick of the unseen clocks below. He reached for the hourglass, but Clara stopped him. "If you break it," she warned, "you'll break the hour. And when the hour breaks, everything comes undone." Crane stared at the sand defying gravity, rising steadily, relentlessly. "Who told you this?" he asked. Both girls smiled, their voices merging into one. "The man who promised us forever. Would you have dared to ask what that promise truly cost?" The night the hourglass reversed, Mill Creek fell under a strange quiet, not the natural stillness of winter, but a silence that felt listening. Even the wind refused to move. Inside the Dunham home, the fire dimmed to embers, shadows lengthening unnaturally along the walls. Dr. Crane kept his lamp close as he watched the twins sit before the glowing hourglass. Their eyes reflected its faint blue light, their faces expressionless. When he whispered their names, they did not turn. Instead, both spoke softly, in perfect harmony. "He is awake." "Who is awake?" Crane demanded. Elise raised her head, her pupils dilating to black. "The man who promised forever," she said. "The one they buried before he finished keeping time." The doctor froze. You mean Thomas Greaves? Clara nodded slowly. He's not in the ground anymore. Crane's pulse quickened. He snatched his coat and lantern, racing toward the old churchyard. Snow fell heavily now, coating the gravestones in pale ash. He found the marker bearing Greaves's name, broken, half swallowed by earth. The soil beneath it was freshly disturbed. He knelt. The ground was warm. Then came the faint sound of ticking, not from his pocket watch, but from beneath the earth. Slow, steady, human. He stumbled back, heart pounding as the ticking grew louder, faster, then stopped entirely. Behind him, the church door creaked open. A figure stood in the threshold, tall, thin, draped in a miner's coat blackened with age. Its head was tilted slightly, as though listening for a sound only it could hear. "Thomas Greaves?" Crane whispered. The figure stepped forward. Its skin was stretched thin, the color of candle wax, eyes bright and unblinking. When it spoke, its voice came in fragments, as though spoken through a broken clock. "Time does not forget." Crane raised his lantern, but the light flickered violently, dimming each time the figure moved closer. "What are you?" he asked. "Debt," it replied simply. "The years you took must be returned." The air grew heavy, pressing on Crane's lungs. When he looked down, frost crept up his fingers as if his body were aging by seconds. He stumbled backward, collapsing into the snow. By dawn, the churchyard was empty. The grave was open. The ticking had stopped. At the Dunham home, the twins smiled as the hourglass turned itself upright once more. The sand began to fall, forward again. Tell me in the comments, would you have believed a man could outrun time itself? By the next sunrise, Mill Creek no longer smelled of pine and smoke. The air had soured, an invisible rot, faintly metallic, clinging to every breath. It drifted from the old mine first, then seeped through the streets, curling around doorways and hearths. Chickens refused to leave their coops. Dogs whined at invisible corners. Dr. Crane returned from the churchyard, pale and shaken, his lantern extinguished, his hands trembling. He said nothing of what he had seen, only that the grave was open and the snow had melted. Around it, in a perfect circle of warmth. The Dunham twins were silent that morning, their faces blank, eyes glassy as mirrors. When their mother tried to feed them, they didn't move. They only whispered, "He's walking the hours now." By noon, the first clock in town shattered, its glass face bursting outward, spraying shards across a tailor's shop. Others followed. In every house, every barn, every church wall, the same phenomenon. Timepieces cracking one by one. And with each shatter came a smell like rusted iron and rain-soaked earth. The townspeople gathered at the square, demanding answers. The sheriff accused Crane of stirring hysteria with his medical nonsense. But before he could finish, he doubled over, clutching his chest. When Crane rushed to help, the man's skin was ice cold, his beard turning gray in seconds. Within moments, he collapsed, his face creased with sudden, impossible age. Panic erupted, doors slammed, curtains were drawn. By sundown, no one walked. The streets. The lamps flickered out one by one until only the Dunham house remained lit. Crane sat by the twins, notebook open, his voice low and steady. "You said he's walking the hours. What does that mean?" Clara turned toward him. Slowly. "He's collecting what's owed," she said. "The town took his time and now he takes theirs." Crane felt his pulse slow. His breath came shallow. The ticking had returned, inside the walls now, muffled and constant, like 100 clocks buried under the floorboards. Outside, the fog thickened to an unnatural density, carrying the faint sound of shuffling steps. Those who peeked from windows swore they saw a man-shaped shadow drifting through the mist, touching doorways as he passed. Wherever he lingered, the wood blackened and decayed. By midnight, Mill Creek was silent again. Not a bird, not a breath. Just the soft, relentless ticking, closer than before. Would you have stayed awake that night, or prayed for time to stop completely? By the 10th day, Mill Creek no longer resembled a living town. The air was heavy, the snow blackened by soot that seemed to fall from nowhere. Windows were shattered, wells frozen solid. Every clock that once kept order now hung lifeless on walls, hands rusted, faces warped. Only one still moved, the hourglass inside the Dunham house, its sand running faster than before. Dr. Crane hadn't slept in 2 days. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his voice reduced to a whisper. He sat across from the twins, who seemed untouched by hunger or fatigue. "If he's collecting time," Crane said quietly, "then how do we stop him?" Clara's gaze flicked to the window. "You can't stop him," she said. "You can only give him back what he lost." Crane frowned. "And what did he lose?" Elise turned toward him, her tone soft but unearthly calm. "The hour that never ended, the one the miners stole when they broke his clock. Outside, the church bell tolled 13 times, a number no bell should know. The sound reverberated through the valley like a heartbeat, shaking frost from the trees. In the distance, the fog parted, and something began to emerge. A tall figure wrapped in darkness, his skin faintly glowing as if lit from beneath. Every step he took left the snow steaming. Crane stood frozen. The twins rose together, walking toward the door. "He's come for the balance," Clara whispered. "It's time to return the hours." The doctor tried to stop them, but the door swung open on its own. The figure stepped through the threshold. The temperature dropped instantly, the air turning crystalline. His face was the same that Crane had seen at the grave, Thomas Greaves, but now impossibly ancient, his eyes flickering like dying embers. "You cannot hold what was borrowed," Greaves said, his voice echoing in overlapping tones. "Every moment must be paid." The twins approached without fear, placing their hands on his chest. The hourglass on the mantel began to whirl violently, sand spinning in both directions at once. The house groaned, beams cracking as light burst through. The seams of the walls, blue, blinding, and pulsing like a heart. When it stopped, the figure was gone. The hourglass lay shattered. The twins stood motionless. And outside, Mill Creek was silent, utterly still, as if frozen between 2 seconds that refused to touch. Only one clock remained unbroken. "Doctor," Crane's pocket watch now ticking backward, "would you have turned it over, or let time run out forever?" When dawn finally came, it brought no warmth. The sun hung over Mill Creek like a pale coin behind fog, its light thin and exhausted. Snow blanketed the town in silence, covering the collapsed roofs, the empty streets, and the traces of what had once been footsteps leading nowhere. Dr. Crane awoke in the Dunham house, slumped over his desk. His lantern had long burned out. The twins were gone. Only the smell of smoke and iron remained. He rose slowly, his body aching, as if the years had pressed upon him all at once. The hourglass lay shattered on the floor, its sand scattered like pale ash across the wooden boards. He stepped outside. The town was frozen mid-motion, doors half open, laundry still hanging stiff on lines, even a stray bird caught in the act of flight, wings locked in place. Time itself had stopped breathing. Crane wandered the empty streets calling for survivors. His voice echoed strangely, swallowed by the air before it could travel far. Every sound he made seemed to lag behind him, repeating a half-second later, like a delayed memory. When he reached the churchyard, he saw that the graves had all been disturbed. Soil cracked, headstones split. But in the center stood a new marker, fresh and unweathered. Thomas Greaves, 1799, 1871. Time paid in full. Behind it, 2 smaller stones. Clara Dunham, Elise Dunham, no dates. Only an inscription that read, "They walked the hours back to him." Crane fell to his knees. The fog thickened, and through it came faint whispers, children's voices, soft and distant, repeating the same phrase over and over. "It's colder inside." He opened his pocket watch. It still ticked backward. Each second that passed drew his reflection younger in the glass. His hair darkened, his wrinkles smoothed. For one fleeting instant, he felt the pull of eternity, an invitation. He could let the clock keep turning. slip through its rhythm and follow them wherever they had gone. But then he heard another sound, the distant toll of a bell, far beyond the hills. 13 times. Again. The same unnatural count. Crane closed the watch and threw it into the snow. Its ticking continued faintly, muffled, as if alive beneath the surface. He turned toward the valley and began to walk, the fog swallowing his figure until only the faintest echo of footsteps remained. By noon, Mill Creek had vanished from every map. Would you have opened that watch, or buried it deeper, and prayed never to dream of time again?